Hey guys, first of all, excuse my voice. I am sick again. I know, I feel like I'm always sick in videos, but today I am doing a video on how I changed Dexter more or less, or how he became less crazy in quotation marks, because really he wasn't crazy. He was just very nervous and very stressed and just a highly strung horse that didn't understand the world pretty much. Now, I'm going to get straight into it and say that number one was I let him mature. And Dexter was a particularly special case because he was still actually with his mum and completely ungelded at 2.5 years old, which is very, very late for that. And most colts would have actually tried to breed with their mum if they were in that situation, but it just shows how immature Dexter was as a horse. He hadn't actually been handled at all either, so his training, even from the start, was very, very behind from most horses, most warm bloods, most thoroughbreds. All those type of performance bred horses would usually be able to be handled and everything, and they would have been well and truly weaned and without their mum, but this was not the case with Dexter. So though he had been handled and broken in, when I got him, he was still very immature, and I think I had just expected him to be more mature than what he really actually was. So sadly, yeah, my expectations were just far too high with him, and I will speak a bit later on that as well. But also, his brothers and sisters are all quite immature or late to mature as well. Some of them, even at 11 years old, they haven't matured, they're still a little bit crazy. But now I know from a lot of my friends and people I know having his half brothers and sisters and seeing how they have kind of struggled with them and how they eventually got through to them, but then some of them they haven't got through to them. So I started to understand that he's just a late maturing horse. And a lot of people that I know that have his half brothers and sisters, they're really, really quirky and also just harder to deal with than most horses. I wasn't warned when I first got Dexter, but now I know from a lot of my friends and people I know having his half brothers and sisters. So number two, I put him on Foresight. Now, this isn't sponsored, but I did contact Foresight and say, I want to mention your stuff in this video because it is incredible, and they sent me these, so thank you very much for that. As I say, this is an absolute lifesaver, this stuff, because I hated riding Dexter in dressage because he has a displaced pelvis, which doesn't really affect him very much, but it can affect other horses to the point where they can't be ridden. But for Dexter, it just makes him more uncomfortable in dressage. I would say that it makes his back end not as good for jumping, but I have realized that when he jumps high enough, he can activate his hind end quite nicely. Before I had him on Foresight, the dressage was horrible. I could not stand riding him, and I ride most of my horses dressage pretty much 90% of the time and then very rarely jump them. So I would always be riding him dressage, and I would just get so frustrated because I just didn't know what to do about him leaning on me all the time and running through my hand. I would put my legs on and then he would stress out, and then he would run through my hand and get long, and I just couldn't compress him and get him traveling upwards without then losing his hind end and him not pushing through from behind. And it was just a constant struggle and me questioning myself and trying a million different methods because I just didn't know how to get him going nicely. But then Jerry went on to Foresight. Then he went out for a break in the paddock last winter, and so I started giving it to Dexter, and I noticed a bit of a difference, but I didn't really consider it to be the Foresight. I thought he was just maturing. But then I took him off it and he went horrible again. And I didn't really relate the two, but then I put him back on it, and that's when I free jumped him and all that, and he was incredible, as you saw in that free jumping video. And then I took him off it again and it went bad again, and I tried to work out why, and then I bought another satchel and I realized why he went bad again. It is because this Foresight makes an insane difference to how he rides in dressage. I virtually can't ride him dressage without it now. And I also think it kind of makes him a bit calmer, probably because he is more comfortable as well. So it's just all round incredible stuff. It really changed Dexter, and it's probably worth a try if your horse has something similar to him, like a displaced pelvis or something like that. The third thing I did was I stopped comparing him to my other horse, which is Jerry, because Jerry is very, very different in temperament to Dexter. He's very different in build, and he is just more mentally sound, and he deals with pressure 10 times better than Dexter, and I'll speak a bit later on that. But yeah, Dexter is just the panicking type, whereas Jerry was just kind of chilled out, and he perked up more. The more he learnt, he would get more sassy. But Dexter was just so insecure and so unsure about what I meant that he would just lose it, basically. And the other thing that I found I needed to stop was I would compare him often to other horses his age and see, oh, that horse is 7 years old and my horse is 7 years old, and that horse is jumping, 130 or 120 or whatever, and Dexter is not. He is being eliminated from 90 centimeters. That is how I felt, and I just felt like I was a failure as a trainer because I couldn't teach this horse and I couldn't progress this horse as fast as my other one. And I felt like Jerry was just an exception, and he was just some incredible horse that I managed to somehow train, but really I was a terrible trainer. And that's what Dexter made me feel like, and so I would feel worse, and then I would push harder, but then the pushing would drive him to do the opposite pretty much, because he's just that type of horse. Number 4, I got into a routine with him. Because he is such a nervous horse, I found having a routine really helped with his anxiety, because in particular I would take him down to this float and I would tie him up, and as soon as I walked away from him, that's how bad his separation anxiety was to me and other horses, I would walk around the other side of the float, he would pull back and run back to his paddock. And this was probably 90% of the time that I took him up there. He would do this as soon as he couldn't see me, because he was just so scared to be alone, which is really sad, and honestly same. But yeah, Dexter is just one of a kind with the anxiety. So the routines that I would start doing with him was I would always tie him in the same spots. At first, when he was doing that pulling back and running away, I would put him in a yard so he couldn't do that. And yeah, I eventually started tying him on the float again when he got more calm. And so I would tie him on the float, I would groom him for a long time, and I always really do this with my horses because I just find it therapeutic for both me and the horse. And then also I would give him lots of scratches, like head, face, like let him rub on my hands and like scratch him, which I would have never thought back in the day that would change a horse so much, but just because he was so anxious, he really thrived on the attention that I would give him. And honestly, it's kind of cute, and I kind of like it now, as much as at the start I thought he was kind of pathetic for being that way. And for some reason, this makes him so much calmer. Number 5, I stopped trying a million different training methods. Now, because we're online and we can access so many different types of training methods, I find I'm wanting to try them all, and wanting to try them all at the same time, or not sticking with a method enough to see if it works or not. So I would be using like masses of pressure and release one day, like being firm, and then the next day I would be really calm and gentle, and he didn't really know how to interpret what I was saying when I was changing so often. So I found in the end, when I started to get to know him better, I would just kind of do what I knew worked the most with him instead of trying all these different methods. And so then he got to know me and how I was training, and the kind of method I use is being very lenient with him, but also being firm when he gets to the point where I can tell he is trying to take advantage of me being very kind to him. 6, I started to learn how his brain worked. Ooh, it took a while. And so, as I was just saying, I started to understand when he was testing me and when he was genuinely worried, and I had to help him through it and be really kind to him and pat him and reassure him, versus when I had to be more firm and just kind of push him through it, because there's a lot of things that he will be very scared of, and 90% of the time he is genuinely scared. But there's some times where he just doesn't want to do something just because he isn't feeling like he wants to do it. Recently, this year, he started just randomly spinning and wanting to walk back home when I started walking him up to the dressage arena, because he obviously just didn't feel like putting in work that day. So he tried to start doing that. But if I didn't nip that in the bud and kick him on firmly, he would do it every single time I would try and get up there. And eventually, if you continuously let horses do that, they will, in the end, just become almost dangerous, and they'll become very unpredictable and uncontrollable, because if you let them get away with it for the first time and then the second time you don't, they'll try harder to get you to give up. And then if you let them get away with it, then it will just get worse and worse and worse, and they'll end up really walking all over you and becoming quite dangerous animals. And this is something that I was taught right from the start in my riding career, because I had an excellent trainer from the beginning, pretty much. So, as I was saying about that trainer, he was very much, you have to constantly be in charge of every single step a horse takes. And that is a very, very traditional training method. However, for Dexter, number 8, I had to start putting myself in his shoes instead of just constantly thinking of it as training, because I realized he is just like me and he is incredibly anxious, and when he is so anxious, he can't really process things the same as other horses, and it's exactly the same as me. Like, I find when I am under pressure, I can barely process things, and it seems almost like you're really dumb, because I thought Dexter was really dumb. And I felt myself like I was really dumb, because sometimes people would ask me things and I just couldn't almost reply at all because I have social anxiety. And I started realizing that Dexter was exactly the same, that I would ask him to do something, and instead of processing the pressure, where the pressure was coming from, it's coming from my left leg, so I should move right in like a leg yield, or I'm putting on pressure with both legs. My outside leg is slightly behind and my inside leg is at the girth. That means walk to canter. He would just go into panic mode because he was just already so anxious that whenever I asked him to do anything, he just couldn't understand or couldn't process what I was asking him because of just the huge amounts of anxiety. And that is something I am pretty firm about with him, because I realized just how anxious he was, and I realized from being more calm and trying to help him through that anxiety, I realized just how much it was impacting how he worked and how much it was impacting how he struggled to learn things and all that. And I don't really know why he became so anxious. Like, he came to me quite anxious, but I think when horses are, I don't know, 3-4 years old, they kind of are just going through life, not really understanding anything. They're just doing what they're asked to. But then at 5, they start waking up and perking up. And because Dexter wasn't very mature, I think he had that at about 6. And he really just started panicking about life. And I think that was also because he was with Jerry in the paddock and Jerry bullied him so much. And it made him really nervous and untrusting. Number 9, I learned to pick my battles, because I found he was so nervous and fidgety that if I tried to correct him for all his fidgeting and everything, it would just end up that I was just constantly asking him to do something else. And I found that just made him worse and worse and worse, because he was just constantly being under pressure, because he would do the wrong thing pretty much 24/7, like when tied up, kind of under saddle more or less. Like, he'd fling his head around, or he would not be going in a straight line, or he'd be sucking behind the leg, or he'd be charging off. Like, he would never be doing quite the right thing. And if I just kept correcting him, he just wound up being more and more and more paranoid. And so I had to take a step back and go, okay, I really want this to be really nice. I want him to be traveling nicely. I want him to be tracking up, and I want him to have his head down. But I can't do that all at once, because when I tried to do it all at once, he would just panic. And because of his panicking and the increase in anxiety, he was doing even more things that were incorrect, like fidgeting or moving around when I'm tugging him up, or flinging his head around, or rushing off with me, or not listening to my leg at all and shutting down. And so it was just this spiral of me overcorrecting him, and then him getting more nervous and doing it more, and then me trying to correct it even more, and then him getting even worse and worse and worse. And so it was just a constant downward spiral, because I was just trying to make it picture perfect but not focusing on each of the things individually, and so it would just make his brain explode basically, and he would either end up shutting down, or we would argue for another half an hour, or he just got so riled up that I would then spend the rest of the ride or session or whatever just trying to calm him down. Number 10, I changed his diet. This is a more specific one, and it is more specific just to Dexter, because he has something called head shakers syndrome, where you'll see a video in a minute, but it's where they involuntarily shake their head and fling their head around and flick their head as if a bee has flown up their nose or something, because they have a nerve in their face that is firing excessively with a specific stimulant. And I found out, thankfully myself and without a vet or anything, that his stimulant and what caused his head shaker syndrome was feeds high in sugar, or feeds with sugar, or feeds with lucerne, aka alfalfa. And it also was caused by grasses which were high in sugar, all that sort of thing. And so poor Dexter caught this head shaker syndrome. I don't know even really if they catch it or if they develop it. It's most commonly geldings around his age and more nervous horses that get head shaker syndrome, and it can honestly be so bad that you have to put them down. But thankfully for Dexter, I did exactly what my feed lady suggested and put him on a sugar-free hay called Multi-Cube, and I also put him on High Gain Zero, which is a zero sugar feed, and that was as per someone else's instructions that their horse had head shaker syndrome. And they also said don't give him lucerne or alfalfa based feeds anymore or anything like that. And as I took him off that, he just completely stopped head shaking. I can see when he eats more grass in the paddock though, because he does start getting the head shakers again, but thankfully we have pretty much completely cured it, because he developed it in late 2017, and I did not understand what it was for over a year, or didn't really understand how to fix it for him. And honestly, I think the lack of sugar in his feeds has also helped with his anxieties and his energy levels and everything like that, because he has calmed down so much since then. Oh my god, my voice. But yeah, that is it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it kind of changed your perspective on horses that are deemed dangerous or overly scared or paranoid or, difficult, because really it is often these horses that are the ones with the most to give you. Everyone's case is individual, but this is what helped my horse stop being so quote unquote crazy. And yes, that's pretty much it. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you when I see you. Bye guys.